So we just finished our movie macro number 9, and I guess now we're going to do this walk and talk. And I want to start with Trump stuff, right? Because I haven't discussed Trump in a while, probably because I'm not really that interested. But I mean, there's been a lot of developments, right, over the last few months. What do you think about the idea that all these Trump charges are, if not outright banana republic, at the very least, that seems to be like the motivation, right? Because I mean, like just seeing how it all started with the Stormy Daniels stuff was like
Yeah,
that was like
that was a bad opening move, I have to say.
even like beyond like the legal question of like whether or not legally it's like legitimate to bring this forward, right, and actually win this case. There seems to be like something like very creepy here that, because like I guess people hate Trump, it doesn't really get discussed, but it seems to me pretty creepy how all this transpires, right? Like, what is it about, people that have like consensual sex with other people, and then just like if they could monetize it in some way, to try to, rush to monetize it, right? I mean, like the way that Stormy Daniels told her story was,
Well, it was just media sensationalism. It was something that they want. People did not want Trump to get elected. They really didn't think that he would. So I think everyone just thought it was funny. Like, oh, this guy who's running for president, he had sex with a porn star and he paid her not to say anything, and now she is saying something, and she said the sex was okay. Like there's something.
but I mean, don't they think that these people that are all involved in this stuff are just kind of like, creeps and freaks in and of themselves? Like, I mean, the way that Stormy Daniels described how they met was like she was at that 2006 with some golf tournament. I think it was in Nevada or something, and she's just describing how, yeah, I saw Trump. He was hot. He was flirting with me, so we decided to have, consensual sex that he didn't pay me for in his hotel room. You already knew everything there is to know about this guy, didn't you? Right? I mean, you knew about the Central Park Five and what he did with that case. You knew about all the media sensations about him, like beating up on, a former wife and ripping out her wig and stuff like that. I mean, you knew all this shit, and still you went for it.
I mean, did she know? I mean, she could just be like
Uh,
kind of a
I,
bimbo,
I mean, she could be a bimbo, but when I've seen interviews of her, like, and like that's the thing. The way that it's presented is like, I saw this one like very funny interview of her where it was like some Australian program, and she was like, whatever you think about Stormy Daniels, her story will be told, and she will not be silenced. And it's like, what story are you talking about here?
I was gonna say, I mean, it doesn't really, except in as much as like somebody having enough money to silence their sexual dalliances or whatever
Mm-hmm.
is bad. Like it doesn't really seem like is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That it doesn't really seem like Trump specifically did anything wrong here, other than get caught, I guess, or do
Yeah.
it with someone that couldn't be trusted. I mean, I always thought the Stormy Daniels thing was just really silly. Like, and like, talk about things that like in people's conscious minds they're going to look down on, but in a certain kind of person they're going to hear that and be like, oh, Trump had sex with a porn star.
Yeah.
They're like, it almost builds in certain kind of admirability to the man in a certain kind of broken American brain.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
I always thought the one thing I will say though is we don't have any access to like the old Stormy Daniels. We have
mm-hmm.
access to the Stormy Daniels that had significant interactions with Michael Avenatti,
Mm-hmm.
who is definitely not a bimbo.
I remember when Avenatti first came out. Somebody
He's
that
crazy, but he's not a bimbo.
like somebody that I knew was like, Avenatti. He, Trump has no answer for him, right? He can't say anything to him, so he tries to avoid him. And I was like, don't make this guy into a hero, because something really bad is going to come out about him. Literally,
I was
it's
gonna
like,
say, like, if anybody ever screamed "scumbag" from like
because immediately you were like,
core.
this guy's such a creep. Like you said that to me like as soon as it happened.
Yeah, no, he was a creep. It was so obvious that he was a creep. Who tries to launch a national political career by being the lawyer that helps Stormy Daniels work out her NDA about sleeping with Trump? Like, come on.
Do you think with this other stuff that's coming out now, whether it's Georgia or whatnot, do you think there's like a banana republic feel to it? Like, does it look to the average observer that they're trying to eliminate him from the pool of potential Republican nominees, and they're doing it to protect Biden. Do you think people think there's like actual legitimate crimes that are being pursued? Because it's like this odd sort of dichotomy in some of this polling, where on the one hand people do right believe that Trump is guilty of crimes, as I do, of course, right, in the
Mm-hmm.
same way that I would say pretty much every president that we've had in my lifetime and before is guilty of crimes, some more than others. Some cover it up better. Some, like Trump, are kind of like sloppy about it. But generally speaking, right, there is this kind of dichotomy in the polling where they believe, on the one hand, that he's committed crimes, but also, and I think this is what's critical, that the reason why he's being pursued for these crimes is because he's Trump, as opposed to any real, reason to pursue it, kind of like like legally. Like, what do you think of that dichotomy? Like, do you think this is going to, like, play out in some way where people are just going to eventually maybe get tired of this, like, especially if, like, if one of the bigger cases, if there's like a failure to get a conviction, I think that would obviously help them much more in the polls, and even some of these indictments have already sort of helped them.
Well, if you look at the polling, people do seem to basically, somewhere in the range of 60 to 70%, think that the charges that he's received thus far, especially the election related and the January 6th related charges, are basically justified. And yet, even despite that fact, he is currently at about a statistical dead heat with Biden in head-to-head polling for the 2024 election. So the dichotomy is not only the one that you said, but the people that seem to think that he's guilty of these crimes, but are nevertheless willing to vote for him over Joe Biden, even in spite of all of that fact, which really signals pretty deep dysfunction in the system and pretty deep alienation from the system on the part of a heck of a lot of average people.
Yeah.
It is kind of banana republic-y, but so would not charging him also be banana republic-y.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
the
it's a
other odd
no-win
part about it.
situation.
That's the other odd thing about it. I think they probably would have had a better case if, or I'd like a better public case in the sense of, the perceptions would be if they didn't, almost magically time everything to coincide not only all together all at once, uh, not all at once, right? It's kind of like this drip over the course of several months. First, we start with this kind of like, just a tiny like little appetizer, right? The Stormy Daniels thing. We know that it's weak, but it's going to make headlines. It's going to make him look bad. It's going to, resurrect this image of him as like, not an actual conservative or whatnot. But then, within the course of like just a few months later, we have all these other indictments. Like, if it wasn't so, like, I mean, like, look, the timing, there's no way you could get around it, right? The timing is done in such a way that it's going to be maximum interference with him doing his campaign, right?
I would say the timing, it definitely bespeaks a certain degree of coordination, but I would imagine the coordination is of the type that is more along the lines of, okay, if we're going to go after this guy, here's the 50,000 boxes that we have to check first to make sure that we have something that could actually go through. Because if we charge him and don't convict him, then it's just going to empower him, and it's just going to empower his narrative about 2020 was stolen and they're indicting me unjustly. I didn't do anything. This is all political. This is just Biden acting like Stalin or whatever it is that is the claim that he is making. There might be coordination along those lines, but I saw this pointed out, and I do think it's true. The fact that Alvin Bragg jumped out in front with the Stormy Daniels payment one certainly suggests a deep sloppiness of coordination, if nothing else. Because why would you lead with that one? Why would that be the first one that comes? I mean, I guess it's an easier case to make because it's less complicated, but the fact that it's so much less complicated and yet only separated from the other cases by a very short window suggests that.
Well, the legal argument is actually fairly complicated from what I could tell, which is part of the problem. But I mean, I could imagine the decision was made specifically because it's like, all right, if this falls kind of like a thud, the people that already hate Trump, they're going to be like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I mean, I know people that hate Trump, and they were like texting and stuff. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Look at this, right? So it got them on board. It sort of quenched that desire, and then now it's like the far bigger stuff that is more consequential, that probably has more legal staying power. And now it's like nobody's talking about the Stormy Daniels case, right?
I do have to say, it does sort of seem like prosecutorial pizzazz to specifically pursue a RICO charge against
Mm-hmm.
Trump in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
I understand the legal argument for it, and it doesn't seem entirely inapt. But considering what the actual purpose of RICO is, which is supposed to be about going after organized crime, it does sort of feel you're trying to you're clearly trying to say that he was behaving in a mafia-like way in this whole thing, which is not exactly true, because the mafia is a lot more competent than whatever Trump was doing in Georgia. I mean, the mafia is full of money-obsessed idiots, but they are better about keeping their shit secret than Trump was, apparently. So, and a lot more successful at doing their thing most of the time.
Yeah, it's one of those odd things where it's like, had Trump not been charged with anything, I would have, just thought like, yeah, I mean, it's exactly what I've been arguing my whole life, which is, look at how differently, legal questions are dealt with, right? If you have sufficient power, right? And the higher up that you go, it's almost kind of expected that you'll be insulated from damage, simply because, like if you're a president, you probably should have some insulation and some level of leeway, right, in terms of like pursuing actions that you think are beneficial to the nation or even to the world. Just by its nature, you will, create a lot of like collateral damage by doing anything, like whether or not you give foreign aid or not, right? Mm-hmm. Whether you pursue a certain kind of Ukraine policy or another kind of Ukraine policy. Like the fact that, given that almost any decision that you make could lead to like mass casualties. Like mm-hmm. I understand structurally some of the reasons, and yet, right, I would have thought this is just more evidence of this kind of double standard, right? If there wasn't a charge, now that there is a charge, now you're forced to deal with the fact that, well, look, I understand the reasons why this was brought forward, but would this be brought forward against any other kind of president? Like, can't we find maybe not like similar, like electoral kind of interference type stuff, but wouldn't, like, if there's something that could be pursued about another president, it probably would not be pursued, right? I mean, famously, Nixon was pardoned, so because like it's like it's time to heal the country, and that's kind of like that's the expectation for so long, right? Healing.
Well, I mean, more immediately, I would say this is downstream of the failure to prosecute anybody in the Bush administration for the lies that they used to drag the country into two 15 to 20-year wars.
And that's the thing. Would that be technically considered even in the realm of illegal or illegal? That's the other question.
It should. And it probably is illegal, but what is illegal and what prosecutors are actually willing to pursue are two entirely different questions. And the way that Bush got us into that war, and Cheney and Rumsfeld and Powell and Condoleezza Rice and all these people, it should be illegal. And I'll bet that it, like, by the letter of the law, is illegal. Mm-hmm. But the idea of prosecuting them over something like that would be seen as stepping on the toes of something that is generally in the prerogative of the executive branch, which is making decisions about deployment of armed forces, and which we now think should have more deference to the executive branch because of terrorism, because it's not state actors that are going after us so much anymore as it is decentralized or diffuse networks of people around political and ideological objectives. So that prosecution would have been, I mean, it should have happened, obviously.
Yeah.
And it would have been healthier for the country now if they had gone after it, but nobody had the stomach for something like that, because it does kind of go against some of the spirit of the Constitution, even if it's perfectly within the letter of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. The idea of distinct powers residing in each branch of government, and sort of an informal agreement to vest more of those powers in the executive branch made by everybody in government. But
Yeah.
you know, now, and the thing is, the reason that they can go after Trump for this stuff is because this is supposed to like not be something that is an accepted crime amongst politicians, you know, trying to undermine. It's one thing to be Stacy Abrams and be like, oh, you know, they did voter suppression stuff, because that's really hard to prove, and it essentially resides in counterfactual. You know, you could prove a pattern of, say, purging black people from voter rolls, and I guarantee that somebody has in the literature, but proving that it was done with malice aforethought is kind of hard, you know. So accusations that something unfair happened in the election that made you lose is one thing, but actively trying to get people to come to the Capitol and have a riot, and actively trying to either pay off or threaten local officials to say that the vote totals said something other than what they say, that's really not something that presidents have been allowed to do historically out in the open, you know. And that's the other really nasty thing, is this idea of pristine elections is kind of a modern phenomenon, because I mean, John Kennedy famously, you know, did a lot of crooked shit to get into office in 1960, for example, and that's in the lifetime of a lot of the voters.
They would not have pursued him, you know. Like, I've often thought about that specific example too. Like, I don't think he would have been legally pursued for some of those actions. And again, like, I wonder, like, to what, like, something like a coronavirus is a classic example. You know, he's responsible for a mass casualty event, right, by not taking COVID seriously, both not only in terms of like the specific death toll under his administration, but also, you know, by letting it loose, right, that's just going to maximize the number of deaths going forward. Even if Biden did everything perfectly, it still, you know, would not have been as good compared to actually keeping everything under control until vaccination was ready. So, you know, all that is there, but like, there's no, like, what exactly would they pursue legally, you know, with Trump for like causing this mass casualty and mass disabling event? You know, the answer is like more or less nothing. And I wonder about the same thing related to Bush. And I also wonder about this like odd, you know, you mentioned Stacey Abrams, but there seems to be this kind of double standard. And I think it's borne by the relative carefulness of Democrats versus the kind of like, you know, ever escalating sloppiness of Republicans, where, you know, Democrats are usually not going to pursue illegal avenues for contesting an election, right? That's not something they're going to do. However, remember, as soon as Hillary Clinton lost the election, she spent, you know, pretty much every single year afterwards just hammering home the idea again and again and again. I didn't lose the election. Trump stole the election. He knows that he's an illegitimate president. That's the quote that she directly used, right? He's an illegitimate president, installed essentially by Vladimir Putin. Now, in that scenario, you're also, let's say, quote unquote, damaging democracy. You're trying to overturn, not, you know, by legal means, but by the means available to you. By the legal means available to you, you're trying to reduce as far as possible people's trust in the electoral process, aren't you? Right? You're not going to go out there and try to like do the kinds of shit that Trump is accused of doing. But I mean, isn't the net effect going to be, you know, I don't want to say it's going to be the same, right? But it's going to be pretty similar, won't it? Right? I mean, because I'm not sure how you felt in 2016, 2017, but I definitely thought, even though like I wasn't buying all these, you know, Russia arguments, there was definitely, you know, a cloud hanging over his presidency. And I thought, you know, it wouldn't surprise me that he would do a crooked deal.
Well, that's the thing,
and get something, you know,
like
that's
everyone, all the right wingers were taking such exception to it. It's like, does this seem out of, again, like with the E. Jean Carroll thing, if it seems in character for him, just assume that he did it.
Yeah.
You know, he's that kind of guy. You know, he is
someone... well, specifically with the rape stuff, one thing that is interesting is he's actually been very rarely accused of like any kind of rape. It's almost always like, you know, he grabbed me, he kissed me against my wishes, you know, he assaulted me in some other way, he said something to me, right?
Yeah, so that doesn't usually escalate
that's the thing, like
the point of a specifically
even his ex-wife,
sexual assault.
Even his ex-wife, like, she alleged all kinds of domestic abuse, but she never did say, he forced me down and have sex
Well,
with me. That is the
I
weird
think
thing
she
about him.
did actually in the first draft of her book, or maybe the first printing of her
Mm-hmm.
book, and Trump paid her to, because she basically said that at one point he came to her and said, you disgust me, I hate you, and like pulled her hair, pulled some of the hair out and raped her. And then in subsequent publications of the book, it said something like he made love to me very coldly or something like that. It was
Mm-hmm.
altered to seem like it was just particularly unpassionate makeup sex or something like
Mm-hmm.
that, rather than the sexual assault / rape that it came
Yeah.
across as in the first printing. So it's not without precedent, but you're right that usually it's not he's most of the accusations against him have been sexual assault and not escalating to the point of rape.
Something similar recently is now happening with Tucker Carlson, where I saw this like image of him basically like sitting down for an interview, and it's something like a man who says he had sex with Obama in 1999
Oh my God, so
shares
fucking
his
funny.
story, and that's literally the phrasing, shares his story. It's like this. It's like the most politically correct, lib brain kind of like vocabulary that you can think of, and he's doing the same thing. It's like
Because he
this,
can't
this
admit to himself that he's doing New York Post stuff.
yeah,
He's got to phrase it. He still wants to think of himself as part of the intelligentsia that
yeah,
contains all of the libs that he
hmm
claims to hate.
yeah,
So he has to phrase it in the delicate way like
hmm
that allows him to say that it's, well, I'm not just pumping out propaganda to try and I'm just letting someone share their story on my platform. Yeah.
why do people think that it's and why is this even allowed? It's kind of like imagine if Kamala Harris participated in some gangbang, and then some guy that was in it is like, oh, you have to pay me money for me to shut up about this. We would rightly say this guy's such a fucking creep. Like, what are you even saying? Like, who gives a fuck, right? Just keep that shit to yourself. Nobody cares. If you had a good time, congratulations that you enjoyed yourself.
Well,
Now
then
move the fuck on. Like, like, how is it allowed? It seems very extortionary. Like the whole Stormy Daniels thing. Like, it seemed like even before it became like public knowledge. Like back in like the early 2010s, late 2000s. It's like there was always this undercurrent of like extortion going on, and it's like, why is this just kind of permitted? It seems very weird to me that, especially in our kind of like very like sexual freedom, radical sexual identity, like I would think that these kinds of behaviors would be absolutely the first thing to go.
it played an importance in an earlier epoch of politics, when people had to put up a front of being moral paragons for the community. The idea of, somebody had extramarital sex or gay sex or whatever with them was an effective way of undercutting their claims to power. So if you were someone in an opposing camp of power, it served a purpose. But nowadays, people just do not give enough of a fuck, because nobody thinks politicians are stalwart paragons of our collectively decided virtue, because there is no like collectively agreed upon virtue anymore regardless. So there's no shared sense of norms to really transgress. And B, everybody knows these people are crooked motherfuckers. Everybody has seen a politician that they like get into office and do nothing and then be way richer after they leave the office because of some lobbying job, or they get a job working for Netflix like fucking Obama did, or whatever. Everybody has had their illusions shattered about this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's at this point, it's just more entertainment. You know what?
Yeah.
If you like reading about it, if you like imagining Obama blowing a guy, if you like imagining Trump laying the pipe on Stormy Daniels, if you like whatever, then have fun. But it doesn't really mean anything, and I don't think it's going to have. The only thing that might have political salience is sexual assaults, but even that, I mean, both of the candidates in the last election had accusations of sexual assault levied against them. And regardless of how credible you found any particular accusation, the fact that neither of those things stuck to either one of them seems like an indication that it's just from here on out going to be seen as another partisan thing that you say about someone.
Yeah.
People didn't used to care that much about sexual assault, so they didn't go there. But now everyone's going to have or people that's how people are going to think about it. You know, I don't actually think everybody that ever runs for president is going to be accused, but any accusation that comes out is just going to be lumped in the propaganda category. So I
Yeah.
don't think it really. I mean, Brett Kavanaugh's on the Supreme Court. You know, it doesn't seem to have any efficacy in actually keeping somebody out of office because politics. The thing is, our politics are supposed to be about getting the best people in office or whatever. That's what the framers had in mind when they wrote the Constitution. It really doesn't. The way that our system is set up does not work if if the parties are relatively ideologically coherent.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was not set up to be something that where permanent factions, like you might have factions over specific issues, but nobody was supposed to be lumped into permanent factions with huge differences in opinion about the structure and purpose of government. You know, that wasn't something that was baked into the constitutional pie. And we pretty much have that with these modern parties. I mean, the Democrats are a lot more feckless in their pursuit of what they claim to be about, but they do claim to be about something particular, you know. So,
So first of all, what did you think of the Trump mugshot? You know, from a kind of like
oh, that was hilarious.
performative. Like, was it well done from
I
some
well,
kind of
no,
angle?
it was hilarious because it didn't like he looks like Ben Stiller in Zoolander. He
Mm-hmm.
looks like he's trying to put on a face of defiance or whatever is the
Mm-hmm.
adjective that somebody told him he should be trying to capture. You know, it looks like,
Like,
you know,
were you thinking?
muggy.
Right, when he gets the mugshot, will he be, um, is he going to be smiling? Is he going to be angry? Is he going to be defiant? Like, did you have any preconceived idea of what?
I kind of thought everybody else that had their mugshot taken before him, they were smiling.
Yeah.
So I kind of thought he would just smile too. I didn't, but I guess he figured there's a lot of pictures of him smiling,
Mm-hmm.
but there's only going to be one picture of him in a mugshot, so he's got to make it like a different look
Yeah.
that he can put on T-shirts.
Yeah.
And I mean, he did that. He did find something that you could put on a T-shirt. I would put a T-shirt on that right now if you gave it to me.
I mean,
it's hilarious.
he is monetizing it now.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Like, he's always there's something about him where, like, when he's being squeezed pretty hard, he seems to like come out of it intact. I mean, think about it, all the bankruptcies, and now it's like, um, he made his way all the way to the presidency. So there's that element to it. Uh, like, do you think having the mugshot everywhere is going to have a positive or a negative effect on his chances, or do you think like ultimately it doesn't matter? Right?
I mean, based on the polling we have now, it seems not to matter that much. But I do tend to think that the collective weight of all of this stuff and it being nothing, or there being nothing else that we talk about for the next year,
Yeah.
is probably going to put doubt in undecided voters' minds. And ultimately, every election comes down mainly to undecided voters.
Doubt in what sense? In what direction?
Doubt I think probably most people are gonna instinctively trend toward deference to the legal system because most people are kind of submissive by nature a little bit, you know. So I think the fact that even if they have some questions or they think there's something bullshit about it or they think some process or other was not followed, I think in all likelihood they're just going to go, well, there's so many charges and everybody's talking about it all the time. He's probably guilty. I don't really want that. So
I
vote for Biden, I guess.
I will say this, that just like psychologically, like I remember the impetus to watch the news in late 2016 and like into 2017, and some of that has definitely come back with the election and with like Trump running. For me, like psychologically, I notice like I have a little bit of a pull, right, where I might pull away from some of the stuff that I normally watch, and I'll turn on, like, I don't know, Rising or some shit, The Hill, and some like story or whatever on Trump or Cornel West or whatever it might be. And I mean, there's something for like about that where, first of all, if you're pulled to watch the news, like, remember how there wasn't, granted, there weren't legal questions, but back then in 2016, the pull to watch Trump automatically just gave him, a boost, right? There was all
Mm-hmm.
this media coverage, and now all that media coverage is back, right? So that's part of it. Another part of it is like when you look at some of the polling of like likability and unfavorability of both candidates, there are Biden and Trump are like in dead heat, right? Like Biden is more or less at the favorability and like approval, disapproval ratings that Trump was, maybe even like a little bit worse.
Which is all kinds of amazing because
Yeah,
I mean, obviously, the way that the withdrawal from Afghanistan was done was incompetent in various ways, but he did do it. He
yeah.
didn't re-engage the Taliban trying to get our helicopters back or whatever and get us stuck there for another year or two or whatever. And inflation was all over the world, so it really had nothing to do with him. And the economy, I don't know. You hear people say that it's bad, and you hear
But
people
that's
say that it's good, but it mostly just seems weird right now.
yeah.
It seems to be it's a low unemployment kind of recession. It's very like certain indicators are good and certain indicators are bad. I tend to think the more we get away from inflation being a thing, and inflation has been trending down the last few months, I think that was probably the thing that was hurting Biden the most in the favorability polling. So if prices start to stabilize in most of the day-to-day consumer
Let's see if we could
goods,
go up and make our way back in the park. And
if prices go, if prices stay stable in like day-to-day consumer goods,
mhm.
then I don't know. There's it seems like there's a lot more minor things that can break Biden's way than can break Trump's way.
You mean towards a favorable to Biden?
Yeah, like there's a lot more tiny factors that could make like a 1 to 2% or less difference that can accrete in a way that gives Biden the ultimate decisive advantage.
Yeah, I do. Oh, I guess we could
Whereas there's
show this.
like if Trump gets in, I tend to think it's probably going to be because something big and major happened.
Hmm.
It's going to be like there was a terrorist attack, or somehow we end up actually with boots on the ground in Ukraine,
Hmm.
or something like that. I think Trump is favored by the kind of unknowable things that will happen in the next year and a half or so.
Yeah, I mean, I was telling Joe Parrish right before the midterms that I think whatever they hear in the news, in fact, the economy is better. At the very least, like whatever you want to say about the economy, it was substantially better than the news reports in late 2022 was making it seem. And I don't think that's necessarily going to change. I mean, there's always different things that presidents can do to, uh, help themselves win during an election year. So I think whatever tools available to Biden, he's going to use them in 2024. And if things are, fairly decent enough now, especially compared to, let's say, maybe 2020 or early 2021, I think that's going to break in his favor. However, there are like that's the thing about this matchup, right? They are both just like Hillary Clinton. They are uniquely suited for random events, right? They're uniquely suited to be swayed by things that should not sway an election. So Biden, he's already fallen several times. He's just literally like one good fall away from not being able to be president. He
Yeah.
is like I don't expect him to debate in 2024. Like that's probably going to look bad because here's the thing: like if he doesn't debate, it's going to look bad. If he does
Well, but
debate, it's going to look bad.
but here's the thing: he's going to be saved because Trump's not going to debate him. Trump's already missed the one RNC debate. I don't think there's.
The RNC debate, but I think if it
I don't
comes
think Trump's going to want to debate him. What's the benefit to, like, if you're Trump,
to
you're claiming that Biden
I mean,
usurped the election
I mean, Biden
and
didn't
stole it
look,
from you.
but like Biden didn't look that good in 2020, right? Like compared to the two of them, like you could say that Trump was very aggressive. It's true, but Biden just seemed like very old and kind of out of it. Not like not the dementia that people were claiming, but still out of it enough where you're like, do you really want either of these people to be president? And Trump still has that vigor. He has that energy. I don't think Biden in 2024 could handle like 3 debates like that. I really don't. I think he would look pretty bad in that situation. I mean, think about how quickly you start to age when you start to hit, late 70s, early 80s. Like every year becomes a major milestone, whereas like, now we don't really feel each
Yeah.
year.
Well, Trump is also pretty old too. I mean, the one thing I will say for Trump, Trump has more juice than he did in 2020 for sure. He just feels a lot more like he did in 2016 this year than he did in 2020. I think being out of the presidency is actually very good for his mental health, all things considered, because he seems to be having a lot more fun doing this now than he was in 2020. But he sounds really old. Like, have you just listen? If you just listen to
I've
him
heard a couple of podcasts.
talk, and there's a couple times he's so raspy. Like there's so much like unvocalized air in his voice compared to how he used to be, that he's really old too. I think a debate actually serves each of them equally poorly. So I think Trump, I think they will probably just mutually agree not to. Honestly, I think Trump.
Really,
Trump is not served by debate, and if you're Trump and you're claiming that Biden stole the election from you,
if you think up to two, Biden would not look worse than Trump up to two in 2024.
I don't know, because sometimes Biden comes to play. Biden looked substantially better in that debate with Bernie than he did in any of the debates with Trump. And there's always the chance that Biden shows up to one of, if he has one or more debates with Trump. There's always the chance that Biden shows up. I mean, he's clearly not getting any younger, and he's clearly not getting any sharper.
Yeah.
But if he has the right mix of, I don't know what pills and energy drinks or whatever he takes, if he has the right mix with the right breakfast that he has that day, he might come, really ready to tussle. So I think the debate just will make them both look bad and probably just drive turnout down in general, but I don't think it would be specifically favorable to either one of them. Although the one thing, just Trump being ballsy and willing enough to stand on stage and directly accuse Joe Biden of stealing the election from him, I guess that could redound to his favor, but it could also look quite terrible. So I just, no matter how I phrase it, it seems like it's a risk for both of them, and it could go either way. So at least in the abstract, I can't say that it seems favorable to either one of them.
Let's say goodbye to the scene for you guys. I want you to feel more and more like you know me and that we're friends. But before we go, one last thing about the election. So in terms of like what could break into Biden's versus Trump's favor, I do think my instinct does tell me that like if the two debate, I think Trump is going to look better simply on account of just like Biden looking bad.
Yeah.
But beyond that, so first of all, I talked to some like traditional Democrats about Russia, Ukraine, and they're still, and I wouldn't blame them, given the coverage, but they're under the impression that Russia is going to decisively lose the war in Ukraine. Whereas to me, it's if I were to bet money on, I would definitely bet money on Russia not having a decisive victory, but a victory in the sense of like, all right, we're going to take what, maybe a little less than half of the land in Ukraine and increase our own population, which was aging out, by 10 to 15 million. I think that's ultimately what's going to happen. And, Ukraine being more or less uninhabitable, right? The refugees, most of them are saying they're never going to return. It's much worse than the kind of brain drain that Russia is experiencing now. It's more akin to what Russia experienced in the 90s. And of course, like, there's going to be this like a rebuilding process. And a lot of the worst Ukraine stuff is probably going to be more difficult to deny in 2024. And given the fact that, for whatever reason, Biden decided to, sort of sell the Russia-Ukraine war as essentially a war that he was participating in. Now it's widely just viewed as like, okay, America versus Russia, and if there's a loss in Ukraine to any kind of like substantial degree, again, we're not talking about decisive collapses of either Russia or Ukraine. We're talking about a huge chunk of Ukraine that is now missing, and an overall net benefit to the Russian economy over like X number of years or whatever. If that's in fact the case, it would start becoming a bit more apparent in 2024. I think, Trump would be able to run at least partly on, you mishandled the war, right? Of course, like the thing about all this is the war, the roots of the war. I mean, if you want to ignore the 90s and the 2000s, the roots of the war begin with Trump's reversal of Obama's neutrality policy. Let's go down there. Neutrality policy in, oh damn, are we in Metropolitan Museum of Art? We got all the way here?
Maybe.
Yeah, I think we are. Um, yeah, I think we are. So, anyway, what was I saying? Yeah, so like it happened by uh, Trump essentially, like just for no reason other than like, Obama did the opposite, so I'm going to reverse Obama's policy on not arming Ukraine. Biden gets into office, he really intensifies this. I said this before, but whatever the radical party does, the pale imitation party, in this case the Democrats, they follow, right? If FDR turns the Democratic Party back in the day into major spenders, creators of infrastructure, so on and so forth, well, all the Republicans afterwards, they did the same exact thing because they couldn't escape that shadow. Now we're in the shadow of Reagan, and Democrats are just pale imitations of Reagan again and again and again. So I think Trump definitely has ends, and also I mean like let's talk about like we haven't even mentioned Cornel West, right? That's third party Green. He's actually the first popular figure, right, in a long time running third party. I could eat, especially with the kind of like
Is he that popular? I mean,
he's
I only ever really hear about him like from like Bernie type circles.
Well, he's popular in the black community, definitely, where it could have an effect. Now, granted, most in the black intelligentsia are just hardcore Democrats, right? But still, like you could imagine the optics, first of all, of like Trump winning. He won black support in 2016 more than other Republicans. He won a larger slice in 2020, and he's winning a larger slice now, according to the polling, into 2024. Assuming that there's a certain segment that goes for Trump and a certain segment of blacks that go for Cornel West, I think you could easily, be in a situation where whatever the polling is in 2024, you would have to add at least like 10 points to Trump, it seems to me.
I don't know. I can't imagine. I mean, Trump added a little bit to his total amongst black voters in 2020, but it was from like 10% to like 12% or something along those lines. It wasn't.
But we have
not
such
a substantial shift.
But it's such razor-thin margins, for elections in America.
Yes, but black people also only constitute 13% of the population, so their percentages don't chip away as much at those razor-thin margins as shifts them. I mean, to the extent that a third party might make the difference, I wouldn't think it would be black voters shifting to Cornel West. I would think it would be former Bernie voters shifting to Cornel West and chipping away at the people that used to be Bernie people that are now just like solid Democrats because they're so disgusted by Trump or whatever. Mm-hmm. So if he could capture that same sense of optimism that people had when Bernie was running, then I guess maybe he could get some of that vote attached to him. But the thing with Trump is he really does have a special odiousness to him, especially after 4 years of being in office, that I tend to think, Trump people are always like, oh, Biden, are you really going to tell me he got 81 million voters? I say, no, I don't think Biden got 81 million voters. I think not Trump got 81 million voters. Because just clearly more people didn't like Trump than did. Like, clearly, you have to live in a cave to think that anything other than that is true. And there's still a lot of that sentiment about Trump floating in the ether.
What do you think about the possibility of, like, in terms of, like, the anti-Trump vote, right, being, like, the de facto Biden vote? I mean, like, one thing that is surprising, I'm not sure if people realize this, but in 2016, we had, I wouldn't say historically low turnout, but it was, lower than the previous two elections, meaning 2008 and 2012.
Yeah.
So clearly in 2016, although like, a lot of people hated Trump, including me, that was not sufficient to go out and to vote against Trump. And do you think being 4 years out of office will sort of create the same kind of like, because we don't have the same hysteria, right? Like, I mean, in 2020, it was like a unique set of things. First of all, it's 4 years of Trump, and it's also 4 years of, well, a year, right? A year of COVID, a year of like, fucking up things left and right, a year of like a a year, a year of a decent economy just being totally, just went down the drain. We're not really going to have that anymore, right? I think we are going to head towards an election where I'm almost certain the turnout is going to be lower than it would be in 2020. I'm not sure if it's going to be like 2016. Maybe we're so polarized now that we're going to keep bringing out, all the kind of emotional people to the polls. But I mean, like, what do you think?
I mean, Biden ultimately beat Trump in terms of the math in the electorally salient states by less of a margin in absolute number of votes and percentage as well than Trump beat Hillary by in 2016. I think people have done the math. It's like 50,000 shifted votes in a few, amongst like 4 or 5 states, and Trump wins. So it's a question of what, because Trump doesn't have to win the popular vote is the thing. Hillary Clinton was correct to call Donald Trump an illegitimate president, but it's because he won by the Electoral College and not the popular vote.
Yeah.
But Democrats can only be so critical of that because they might need it at some point.
Yeah.
They can go hard against it, but they can't be, they can't go all the way to really taking proactive steps to abolish it, which they could. The popular vote interstate compact could be passed in 270 electoral votes worth of states and commit states to pledging their votes for the popular vote winner instead of the individual popular vote winner in their state. And you don't see Democrats really talking about that very much, maybe because they think it would get challenged in the courts. I don't know. But the point is they can't go too hard against it because it's conceivable that
they just walk through the party. I don't want to.
It is conceivable that they could win an electoral vote and lose the popular vote. That's what people at first thought was going to happen in 2012. As a matter of fact, Trump did a tweet to that effect because he doesn't understand how electoral math works. But people can conceive of it. Is the point. So, what was I saying? So it's really only a thin margin that Donald Trump has to flip. But the question is, are there more people that are going to be disgusted with Biden because of inflation and Afghanistan? Or are there more people that are going to be disgusted with Trump because of all the legal stuff and the indictments and the possible convictions and trials and all that stuff that's going to happen before the election? And it's really such in a country where the elections are, they have 130, 140. I think the last one had like 150 million in it, actually. 50,000 is really not that much. So we're talking about really tiny margins in just a few states. And it's basically impossible to predict how they're going to go until we get closer.
Yeah.